The hip-hop world has been rocked by a massive FBI sting operation that recently involved Jim Jones, a legendary member of Dipset and a longtime industry veteran. Leaked court documents, wiretap phone calls, and secret deals exposed on tape have all led to one shocking conclusion. Jim Jones was being watched for a long time, and now the truth is coming out. But what exactly did the feds uncover? How did Jim Jones get caught up in this legal nightmare? Could this be the last nail in his career? Stay tuned as we break down all the details, the shocking evidence, and the true reason Jim Jones, who has been in the hip-hop industry for decades and is well known for his role in the iconic group, the Diplomats' Dipset, and his giant hit We Fly High, is currently facing serious legal issues. Although his music career has had its ups and downs, his connections to the streets have always raised eyebrows. For years, there have been rumors and whispers about Jim's connections to organized crime gang activity and dubious business dealings. But the FBI's most recent sting operation has intensified those rumors, according to. In today's video, we look closely at the FBI sting operation, how Jim Jones became involved, the secret phone recordings that revealed his alleged involvement, and what this means for his career freedom and future. However, before we break it all down, I would like to know if you believe Jim Jones is guilty or if this is just another instance of the feds targeting a well-known rapper. Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Let's get into the specifics and remember to stay tuned. We must go back to the beginning of the FBI's investigation to understand how Jim Jones ended up in this legal mess, because we're going to reveal the most shocking detail about this case that the media hasn't yet told you. Law enforcement doesn't just decide to put a rapper under surveillance one day. These kinds of operations take months or even years of planning, gathering evidence, and following leads before they take action. According to sources close to the case, federal agents have been keeping an eye on certain high-profile figures in the hip-hop industry for some time. Jim Jones's name kept coming up in the context of alleged connections to criminal organizations, money laundering, and illegal business dealings. But the real turning point in this investigation is said to have occurred when an insider with connections to the streets and music industry began providing law enforcement with information. This informant reportedly gave the FBI important details about meetings, transactions, and even direct conversations involving Jim Jones. So what did the feds do? They did what they do best. Leaked reports state they began listening. If there's one thing we've learned over the years, it's that when the federal government starts listening, people go down. In the case of Jim Jones, the FBI's wiretap allegedly uncovered more than anyone anticipated from the recorded phone calls and messages. Just when Jim Jones believed his conversations were private and off the radar, law enforcement was listening to every word. But what exactly was captured in those recordings, and how did it seal Jim Jones' fate? Stay with me because what we're about to discuss next will shock you. What specifically did Jim Jones say that caught the feds' attention? The infamous wiretap connection. This isn't the first time Jim Jones's name has been linked to wiretap conversations. And back in 2019, he was involved in a leaked call with Tekashi 6ix9ine. Let's be clear, the government doesn't tap phones for no reason. They need to provide enough probable cause to convince a judge that someone is involved in criminal activity. Once that warrant is approved, every call, text, and voice memo can and will be used against you. The FBI wiretap in this case allegedly recorded private conversations between Jim Jones and people with known criminal ties, including discussions of financial transactions and coded language that investigators believe referenced. Former associates were discussing violence, street retaliation, and keeping people in check. That conversation alone raised eyebrows, but at the time, Jim Jones managed to avoid serious charges. However, fast forward to today, and it appears that his name has surfaced once again in another major investigation. Now, this is where things get really messy. According to some reports, Jim Jones was not just an innocent bystander. He was allegedly giving orders. Law enforcement officials believe that the recorded conversations showed Jim Jones discussing strategies, transactions, and even potential ways to avoid law enforcement detection. If these reports are true, the FBI may have evidence that Jim Jones was directly involved in coordinating certain activities. But here's the thing: coded language is tricky. Just because someone says something vague on a call doesn't mean it's illegal. However, if the government can demonstrate that the words used were referring to specific crimes, that's where the real trouble starts. The big question is whether these recordings will stand up in court. We've seen cases where wiretap conversations were dismissed for lack of context. Defense lawyers frequently contend that just because someone says something doesn't mean they actually committed a crime. But the feds don't like to lose. So if they've taken this action against Jim Jones, it means they probably think they have. If there's one thing you should know about the federal government, it's that they never take action unless they think they have enough to win. The feds have a 90% conviction rate, which means they don't bring charges unless their case is clear. So how did they build this case? There are rumors that the FBI has months or even years worth of recorded conversations. What's next for Jim Jones? Could this be the beginning of the end for his career? Stay tuned, because the next revelation is even more shocking. One of the biggest red flags for federal investigators is unexplained wealth, which we've seen repeatedly, whether it's with rappers, politicians, or businessmen. When the money doesn't add up, the feds start looking into Jim Jones. He's been in the rap game for decades, but recently, fans have noticed that his music hasn't been charting as it used to. Despite this, he's been seen living lavishly, purchasing expensive jewelry, luxury cars, and leading an eyebrow-raising lifestyle. So the question is, where is all of this? This money came from federal agents who allegedly started tracking financial transactions connected to Jim Jones and his associates. These weren't just ordinary bank transfers, though. According to leaked reports, authorities believe that some of these transactions were intended to conceal the true source of the money. When the feds begin investigating money laundering, things can quickly spiral out of control. Step 2. The power of the informant. If there's one thing the feds love, it's the big question is who snitched. In the past, Tekashi 69,999 flipped on his entire crew, leading to multiple arrests. In other high-profile cases, insiders have also turned state witnesses to reduce their sentences. In this case, someone close to Jim Jones may have been working with authorities. Now consider this: when the FBI launches a sting operation, they frequently rely on inside sources who are either looking for a way out of their own legal troubles or want to take down bigger names. Imply that a former coworker of Jim Jones, someone with extensive ties to the criminal underworld, may have been providing the feds with information for a long time. If this is the case, it could explain how the authorities were able to construct such a compelling case. However, the real problem is that once the feds get an informant inside, they don't stop. They continue to connect the dots, gather more evidence, and eventually move in for the arrest. This leads us to the next big revelation. Jim Jones is actually being charged with Step 3, the potential charges that Jim Jones faces. Have the official indictment details, but sources indicate that Jim Jones may be facing some serious federal charges, including conspiracy to commit racketeering, RICO. If prosecutors can show that Jim Jones was involved in an ongoing criminal enterprise, he may face a RICO charge, which carries a significant prison sentence, and money laundering charges. If those suspicious financial transactions are connected to illegal activities, Jim Jones may face a federal money laundering case for aiding and abetting criminal activity, even if he wasn't the one who committed the crime. The worst part is that if the feds pursue Jim Jones under RICO laws, they don't need to prove that he personally committed crimes. All they need to do is show that he was affiliated with an organization that did, and that alone could be enough to send him away for years. If authorities can demonstrate that he assisted in facilitating illegal actions, he could still be held accountable for obstruction of justice. If Jim Jones attempted to hide his tracks or warn people about an investigation that could result in even more charges, they could still be charged with crimes. As we delve deeper into this case, one question keeps coming up. Is Jim Jones truly guilty? Or is he just another well-known person caught in the crosshairs of the federal government? One thing is certain, this is not just another celebrity scandal. This case could be the biggest legal battle of Jim Jones's life. However, the question still remains. Is he being singled out by the system, or is he truly guilty? This is where things take an even darker turn, because what we're about to discuss next could change everything. Consider the history of the federal government's relationship with rappers. We've seen this story unfold before. Tubb Shecker was harassed by law enforcement on a regular basis, and despite his legal issues, many people thought the police were actively trying to frame him. The hip-hop industry has always been under close scrutiny from law enforcement, and many rappers have been investigated, arrested, and even convicted, not just for crimes they committed, but also for the people they associated with. The government is cracking down on the rap industry more than ever before, as evidenced by the recent involvement of rappers Lucci, Young Thug, and Gunna and Rico cases. To bring him down, Snoop Dogg was once charged with murder at the height of his career despite having little to no direct connection to the crime. Meek Mill was caught in a never-ending legal battle that kept him in and out of courtrooms for years, with many believing he was being unfairly targeted by the system. Now we have Jim Jones, a rapper with decades in the game, suddenly caught up in a massive federal investigation. But why now, though? We've seen hip-hop evolve into more than just music. It's now a multi-billion-dollar industry influencing politics, social justice movements, and even business deals. Some people contend that whenever a black artist gains too much power, the system finds a way to bring them down. One theory that has been circulating is that Jim Jones's legal issues may be about more than just criminal activity. They believe that there are powerful forces in the music industry that don't want certain artists or figures to have influence. The streets versus the law. Can Jim Jones beat the system? If Jim Jones intends to fight these charges, he will need one of the best legal teams money can buy. Federal cases are notoriously difficult to beat. The conviction rate in federal court is over 90%. When the feds come after someone, they usually have years of evidence stacked against them. Could it be that his arrest is part of a larger agenda? Or is this really a case where the evidence is overwhelming and the feds simply couldn't ignore it? If Jim Jones genuinely thinks he is innocent, his best option is to fight the charges in court. This would entail cross-examining government witnesses, such as informants or former associates, and contesting whether the wiretaps were lawfully obtained. He could also argue that his conversations were taken out of context, arguing that just because someone talks about something doesn't mean they actually committed a crime. However, if he loses at trial, he could face decades in prison. When the government offers Jim Jones a deal, he could accept a lesser sentence in exchange for cooperating with authorities to reduce his time and possibly avoid a long-term sentence by negotiating a lesser charge. However, accepting a plea comes with consequences. It would mean admitting guilt and could permanently damage his career and reputation. The question of whether hip-hop will support Jim Jones and how the hip-hop community will respond to his arrest is also crucial. Most federal cases never go to trial. Instead, defendants take plea deals to avoid harsher sentences. When Meek Mill was in prison, the entire industry, including Jay-Z, Drake, and large corporations, supported and helped free him. When Tekashi 69 was arrested, the culture turned against him after he cooperated with the federal government. When Young Thug and Gunna were charged, there was a wave of support, but also a lot of controversy over the use of rap lyrics as evidence. What about Jim Jones? He has been a respected figure in hip-hop for decades, but will the industry support him or will people turn away? Jim Jones's future and what comes next will depend on the strength of the evidence against him. If the FBI has years' worth of financial records and TAPS, it could be a difficult case to fight. If he can find weaknesses in the prosecution's case, he might have a chance to beat the charges. How the public and industry react will determine whether he has the support of fans and other artists, or will he be left to fight this battle alone? The case is about more than just Jim Jones. It's about the hip-hop industry, the legal system, and the power dynamics at play. Will Jim Jones beat the charges and walk free? Or is this the end of the road for his career and his freedom? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: this story is just getting started. According to federal sources, Jim Jones was allegedly caught on tape discussing illegal activities, financial transactions, and what could have been said on these tapes that resulted in Jim Jones' arrest. Let's break down the role of wiretaps in RICO cases. Federal agents don't just wiretap someone's phone at random. There is a lengthy legal process behind it called probable cause. The FBI must provide enough strong evidence to persuade a judge that a criminal was involved in a serious crime. The government probably believes that Jim Jones was involved in an ongoing criminal enterprise if he was wiretapped. However, the situation gets even more complicated because the alleged conversations indicate that Jim Jones wasn't just an innocent bystander on these calls. Some leaked reports claim he was discussing financial transactions connected to illegal activities, while others state that a judge must approve the request based on the belief that criminal activity is taking place. The most shocking part is that some people think the tapes may contain violent conversations or possible criminal plans. It's important to remember that just because someone is recorded discussing something doesn't mean they actually committed a crime. Context is crucial. Could these conversations be misinterpreted? One of the main defenses Jim Jones could raise is that his words were taken out of context. After all, hip-hop culture frequently uses coded language and street slang, which out-of-context statements might. The connection between Jim Jones and the 6991 case is not new. Back in 2019, during the trial of Tekashi 6 AIC, Jim Jones' name was brought up in court, and a wiretap was played where Jones allegedly called 6999 a snitch and talked about needing help. For instance, if someone says, "We got to handle that situation," does that mean violence or just resolving an issue? If they talk about moving weight, are they discussing drugs or just talking about business? If they mention taking care of someone, is that a threat, or are they just looking out for a friend? If Jim Jones was already on the radar from the 691 case, the feds might have been building a case against him for years. If they had suspicions back then, they might have been waiting for the right time to move in. If they had wiretap evidence from the past, they could be using that to strengthen their current case. To super violate him, many people think that meant he was ordering an attack on 6999. However, Jim Jones never faced charges from that wiretap. This begs the question, is Jim Jones a? The question of whether he was a victim of past associations or actually involved in illegal activity is always raised by the informant theory. Federal investigations frequently rely on someone from the inside flipping and providing information. For example, in the well-known cases of Tekashi 6999, who turned informant and helped convict members of his former crew, Alpo Martinez, a well-known snitch who helped bring down major drug lords, and Sammy the Bull Gravano, who helped bring down the Gambino crime family, it is possible that someone in Jim Jones's circle is involved. The FBI may have had someone close to him record conversations with the FBI. A former associate may have been able to reduce their sentence, or someone may have been forced to cooperate to avoid facing charges themselves. If there is an informant in this case, it may indicate that the feds have inside information that we are unaware of. But the legal battle that lies ahead is whether Jim Jones can overcome the wiretaps. Although wiretap evidence can be extremely damaging, a conviction is not always guaranteed. Jim Jones's legal team has a few options. One challenge is the legality of the wiretaps. As we discussed earlier, the defense can demonstrate that the wiretap was obtained improperly, in which case the evidence could be thrown out. Was there actual probable cause? Did the government follow all legal procedures? Could there have been a problem with the warrant? If so, could there have been a mistake in the process? Jim Jones's lawyers could argue that the recording should be excluded. They could also argue that the conversations were misinterpreted. If Jim Jones's lawyers can demonstrate that the conversations were not direct proof of criminal activity, it could weaken the case against him. If the government's case is too strong, Jim Jones may have to make a difficult decision and either accept a plea deal or risk a lengthy prison sentence. Plea deals typically mean less prison time in exchange for admitting guilt, possibly probation or house arrest instead of federal prison, avoiding a drawn-out, costly trial that could go badly, but accepting a deal could ruin his reputation as well.